When we think about Alzheimer's disease, the picture that usually comes to mind is, well, it's pretty bleak. It feels like this unavoidable fate, right? Like our memories are just a sandcastle, and genetics are the tide, just slowly, unstoppably washing it all away. It feels more like a terrible lottery than a disease you can fight.
But what if that core belief, that feeling of total powerlessness, is just wrong? What if we've been looking at this whole thing backwards? What if Alzheimer's isn't some genetic curse we just have to accept, but actually a metabolic problem we can do something about? Okay, let's really dig into this.
To really get this new way of thinking, we have to basically become detectives. We need to go back and revisit a very old, very cold case. We have to figure out why the main investigation into Alzheimer's, which went on for decades, just hit a total dead end.
For the last 30 years, pretty much the entire medical world has been laser-focused on one single suspect: these sticky protein clumps in the brain called amyloid plaques. And the logic, it seems simple enough. You see the gunk, you clean up the gunk, you cure the disease. But after pouring billions of dollars into this and running more than 25 huge drug trials, the result was a complete and utter failure. Getting rid of the plaques did not stop the disease.
And this massive failure forced everyone to ask a really tough question. What if the plaques weren't the fire at all? What if they were just the ashes left behind? It meant that for 3 whole decades, we'd been meticulously cleaning up a crime scene without ever even looking for the arsonist who actually started the fire.
So researchers went all the way back to the drawing board. They started looking at the brain in the much, much earlier stages of the disease, way before all those plaques even show up. And what they found were these 3 critical alarms going off. Early clues that pointed to a totally different culprit.
So the first alarm was something called neuroinflammation. Now, this isn't like a big raging fire. Think of it more like a smoldering campfire inside the brain that just never, ever goes out. This constant, low-level state of alert just slowly damages all the healthy brain cells around it. It's a really hostile environment.
The second alarm they found was brain insulin resistance. Okay, here's how to think about this. Your brain is an energy hog, right? And it needs insulin to open the door to let its main fuel, glucose, inside. But with insulin resistance, the brain cells just stop listening. They ignore the signal. They are quite literally starving in the middle of a granary. There's fuel all around them, but they have no way to get it inside.
And that, of course, leads directly to the third alarm, mitochondrial dysfunction. See, mitochondria are the tiny little power plants inside every single one of your cells. When they start to fail because they're not getting fuel, it's like the entire power grid for the city that is your brain just starts to go dark. So what we have is a smoldering fire, a fuel line that's been cut, and a power grid that's failing. It's a full-on energy crisis.
So when you put those 3 clues together, the inflammation, the fuel shortage, and the power failure, it stops looking like a simple protein problem. It starts to look like a deep, systemic, metabolic crisis. And that, of course, brings up the next big question.
I mean, what kind of arsonist could possibly start a fire, cut the fuel lines, and shut down the power plants all at the same time? Well, the answer is actually incredibly common and really surprising.
Fructose? Yeah, I know. You're thinking of the sugar in fruit, right? But the real story here is so much more complex than that. New research, especially from Dr. Richard Johnson, is pointing the finger at fructose as the key that unlocks this entire destructive cascade in the brain.
To understand why, you first have to understand fructose's motive. See, it's not just another sugar. It's a special key that flips a very ancient biological program called the survival switch. This switch is designed to do just one thing: get an animal ready for a long time without food, like hibernation. It basically tells the body to store fat like crazy and cut back on energy use.
And here's the crucial difference. When your cells get glucose, they use it to make energy, called ATP. Simple. It's like putting gas in the tank. But fructose is weird. When it enters a cell, the very first thing it does is use up ATP. This sends a massive panic signal to your brain, basically screaming, "We're out of energy, we're starving," even when you've just eaten. It literally tricks your body into thinking there's an emergency.
So right about now, you're probably thinking, okay, I get it, but I don't drink a lot of soda or eat tons of dessert, so I should be okay, right? Well, this is the part of the story that is just mind-blowing. It turns out you don't even have to eat fructose for it to become a huge problem in your brain. Because our bodies, and our brains in particular, have a hidden fructose factory. When we eat high glycemic carbs, things like white bread, rice, potatoes, our blood sugar shoots up really fast. And in response to that sudden flood of glucose, the brain can actually trigger this emergency pathway that converts the extra glucose directly into fructose. So even if you never touch a sugary drink, a big bowl of white rice can kickstart this whole toxic process right inside your own head.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a prime suspect, fructose. We have a motive, flipping that dangerous survival switch. Now let's look at the hard evidence, the actual forensic trail that links this suspect directly to the crime scene of Alzheimer's.
First up, the big picture evidence from population studies. The famous Framingham Heart Study followed thousands of people for decades, and it found a direct link. People who regularly drank sugary beverages didn't just do worse on memory tests. Their brain scans showed they had measurably smaller brain volumes. Their brains were literally shrinking.
Second, the anatomical evidence. This is the smoking gun at the crime scene. When scientists looked at the actual brain tissue from deceased Alzheimer's patients, they found that the concentration of fructose right in the memory centers of the brain was 5 to 6 times higher than in healthy brains. The suspect was found in huge amounts right where all the damage was being done.
But, correlation isn't causation. To really lock this case down, you need controlled experiments. So researchers took mice and fed them a high-sugar diet, one that's a lot like the modern human diet. And the result? The mice developed the complete pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Plaques, tangles, brain shrinkage, memory loss, the whole shebang. This is what establishes a direct causal link. The sugar diet triggered the metabolic storm that wrecked their brains.
But that still leaves one final mystery. Why? Why does this survival mechanism seem to specifically target our memory and our thinking? Well, the answer is fascinating, and it's all about the switch's evolutionary purpose.
This switch evolved to drive one behavior, foraging for food. To push an animal to go out and explore new territory, maybe dangerous territory, it needed to be a little less cautious, a little more impulsive. So the switch actually dampens down the parts of the brain that handle recent memory, like, hey, remember that predator that was here yesterday? And self-control. For short-term survival, it was a brilliant trade-off. But the problem is, when that foraging mode gets stuck on by our modern diet, it causes the slow, chronic destruction of those exact same parts of the brain.
So, by cracking this case, we've done something pretty incredible. We've completely changed our understanding of Alzheimer's. It's no longer just some genetic curse that we have to sit back and accept. It's a metabolic condition, and that means we actually have the power to influence it. And the strategy to fight back becomes really, really clear. It is all about turning off that survival switch. That means, yes, strictly limiting sugar, but also those high glycemic carbs that turn into fructose in your brain. It also means watching your salt intake, because that actually speeds up the fructose-making process. And finally, staying well hydrated, because dehydration is another one of those stress signals that flips the switch on.
And all of this leads to a final, pretty heavy thought. For hundreds of thousands of years, this survival switch was an amazing evolutionary tool that helped our ancestors survive famine. The question we have to ask now is, in our modern world of constant, endless food, has this ancient survival tool, overstimulated day in and day out, become the very weapon that is waging a war against our own minds?